Hi, and welcome to the Business Mindset and Magic podcast. I'm your host, Ava Carmichael, and today we have with us my sister, Devina St. My sister is also a co-owner and facilitator of Earth Goddess Rising, women's spiritual travel business, and she is also a QHHT facilitator. Is that correct?
Yes.
And today we are going to be talking about past lives. This is a subject that has been coming around a lot for people who are, well seasoned in past lives and people who are just now entering into that whole experience and have a lot of questions. So we're here to talk about past lives. So Davina, tell me a little bit about your thoughts on past lives and your own experience with it.
Well, my first experiences, I think, started when I was a kid without knowing it because I didn't grow up in a family that believed in that kind of thing. So I had no idea there was this thing of a past life. So whenever I had these little things happen, I made a note of it, but I didn't know what it was. I think the first memory, one of the first memories was I was working at the time. I thought I wanted to be a nurse. So I got a job at a nursing home just to see what nurses do. And there was this senile old man there. And he asked me one day, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "What are you doing here? What is the Duchess doing in here?" And I thought, what? Is he crazy? But at the moment he asked me that, I splashed back into a memory and I looked down and I had this beautiful blue dress with beautiful sleeves. And I saw myself in a gorgeous gown. And then, that memory, and I was thinking, wow, that was cool. It was just like a quick flashback. And at that time, I still didn't connect the dots to it. But I do remember that was a weird thing, maybe a message.
And at what point did you determine that past lives? I mean, what was the turning point in your life that kind of solidified that for you?
Well, I still didn't know. I went to a past life regression. I want to say it was in 2001 in Denver, in one of those witchy shops downtown. And they had a back room where I signed up for $20 with a group of people to do a past life regression. And I didn't know what I was getting into. I was just open-minded. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And it was the most vivid experience I've ever had. Like, I've done past life regressions since then, but this one was, I guess, a lot of information that I needed to know for some reason or another. And and it was the Duchess life. And I heard everything. Like when she was asking us, "What's your name?" Look in the mirror. First thing we did was we saw our shoes. And I saw that it had these like really fancy, pretty, I call them granny boots. I have no idea what their name was, and I saw that, and I saw my dress, and I came up, and then when I looked in the mirror, I saw that I had dirty blonde wispy hair up, and I was looking in like a gilded mirror. It almost felt like, and I was young. I liked my face. I remember thinking, "Oh, I like the way I look. I have a soft, complexion." And I heard everything. I heard my husband's name. I heard my name was Sarah Jennings Churchill. I knew my husband was a military commander of some type. I just didn't know. And his name was John Churchill. And we had a title. I remember thinking, oh, titles don't mean anything, which is so funny because that's exactly Sarah's character after reading up on it later on. But at the time, I didn't know. I saw all these things and didn't realize this was a real person at the time because I never heard of him. We're in America, so we don't study English history. So, but I do remember in third grade when I first learned to write, I would write it the way English people write, with the OU. And before I knew I wasn't supposed to spell things that way, I automatically started writing that way. So I think that life was important.
So do you think that a lot of children probably kind of bring things in with them whenever they're young, maybe carry over like habits or ideas or memories from past lives?
I do. I think so, because I didn't know. Like I said, we have our family still doesn't believe in that kind of thing. But it's strange because I honestly don't feel like I am from this century. Like I know a lot of people do feel like connected to the 20s or the 40s or,
Mm-hmm.
there's certain periods in time. But I honestly just really felt out of place in this modern world. Like I
Mm-hmm.
still feel like I belong somewhere else. Like I feel like I'm in the wrong time period
Yeah. I
for
think a lot
me.
of people would say that too. I mean, I personally know a lot of people who feel like they're in the wrong era, you know.
Yeah, I'm not in the right time period. And there's not supposed to be billboards and shit everywhere. It's supposed to be beautiful and natural still.
Yeah. And I wonder sometimes if, there are lives that people have lived that were so significant that, you know, they that they enjoyed so much that maybe it's hard to be present in the one that they're currently in because that last one was so wonderful, or that particular one
Hmm.
was so wonderful that it just left such an impression.
I don't know. I think it's interesting because, when I did my one and only DMT trip,
Mm.
whenever I did that, it was like I saw everything happening all at once simultaneously. Like I flew out of my body and I was above in the universe looking down and seeing everything, and everything was happening all at once. So even that lifetime was occurring, although I wasn't there. I was, I'm in another life. I wonder about that. They say that's what's happening. I wonder if there is a past. Like, I mean, I know we're in the
Right.
21st century, I guess. Is that where we are?
Something like that.
Something like that. But like, how is that possible? Like, can we get glimpses of other time periods? Are we there and here at the same time?
I mean, I've heard that theory. I mean, I've heard of that theory that everything's existing all at once. That everything we feel like is happening in the past is kind of happening now too. It's really hard to wrap my head around um,
Mm.
that theory, but I can kind of understand, like, I guess from a maybe a quantum type of point of view, that everything's happening simultaneously. I have a friend that could probably explain it a lot better than I could, but yeah, I've heard I've heard
Yeah.
that
So,
theory.
but yeah, I definitely would definitely like simpler days or times when the food wasn't, it was real food, and you know, I don't know. I do feel like I don't belong in this this time.
So tell me a little bit more about the past life regression therapy that you did. What was that like? What did that feel like? Did you feel like you were asleep, or like?
Okay, so what I did after that, I discovered Dolores Cannon. So at that time, I don't know if she was Dolores Cannon because it was just a group hypnosis. So I don't think she was Dolores Cannon trained, which is QHHT is what I learned in. But I think that from then on, I kind of forgot about it. It was like the internet. I looked for who to try to find out who Sarah Jennings Churchill was at that time. I never found it. It was years later. I guess at that time I just wasn't ready to get that information, but I kept a note. But it feels like your relaxed state, because you are when they hypnotize you and they're counting, you're getting into that. It's not delta, because delta is the deep. You wouldn't be conscious. I think if it's delta, I think it's theta. Is that
Mhm.
what it is? Theta. And so you're in that sleepy state, but yet you're still following. Like they'll tell you, when you get off the cloud, what is the first thing you see? And so I actually did have a profound hypnosis session. The second one was with a Dolores Cannon trained person.
Mhm.
And that one was really profound. She had me write a list of things that I wanted to ask during the hypnosis session. And so so she would ask me these questions so that I could tell her. And it is like you're sleepy, but you're not fully asleep, or at least you're not supposed to be.
Mhm.
And when I got off the cloud, I was in the very beginning. I was like out in space. I saw like the beginning of time, and it looked like sun, like the central sun, and like plasma exploding was like entities and creation, and
Mhm.
I saw that, and I also saw Saturn, which was interesting because Saturn wasn't Saturn. It was Saturn, but the ring was like beings.
Interesting.
The ring around Saturn was like a whole bunch of beings. I don't know. I don't know what that was. But that was profound. And so I asked, because I had some issues with my oldest son, and I was like, well, what is our karma? What is our dynamic? Why has it been so difficult with him? And what I was shown is that I was shown a past life in Egypt, and I think that I was a priestess. I'm not sure what was going on, but I feel like I was okay, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I feel like I was I was a priestess, but I feel like I had a child.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw the child, and it was about, I want to say he was probably about 8 or 9. I'm not sure, but he got taken away, and then I was accused of something, and I remember thinking, this isn't true, this is lies. They're just, there was someone that didn't like me. I was kind of like a scenario, of some sort of person who had more power than I did, and they lied against me, that kind of thing. And then I was getting hauled out, which is really cool because I was hiding I remember seeing these nets blowing in the wind, and it was, I saw the pillars, the pillars that are painted and in my room. And then I was hiding, but then they came and got me, and there was this Roman guard, because I could tell, his helmet, he had a Roman helmet, and the clothing and everything was very Roman. And which is interesting because that's whenever Cleopatra came. That was also a Roman time period. She lived in that time. But I'm not saying that was the same time, because I think it was the Ptolemy period is when they had the Romans occupying Egypt. So it could have been anywhere in there. But and I looked in the person, and I think I was fighting. I spit on him, and I don't know. I thought I was fighting him, and I saw his eyes, and he stabbed me in the gut with a knife, a sharp dagger, and it was my son's eyes. It was my firstborn son's eyes, which you remember. He drew a picture when he was 3 years old of stabbing the mama. Remember that?
He did that a lot. Yeah, he drew pictures of that a lot. And he was very young. He was probably no more than 3 years old, 4 years old at the time. He would draw a lot of those. And he was very distraught and sad. And there seemed to be a lot of trauma and violence around him. But he was still just this child who was sweet. And it was like he was sweet and he was loving, but there was still like this absolute sadness with him that sat with him. And so it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, and it makes me wonder, again, to the next question of, do we incarnate with the same soul group or the same people, and do we come in with the past trauma, to either heal it, or do we remember it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think he, as a 3-year-old, because he was my other 3-year-old, or my other daughter, my only daughter was drawing at 3 too. She was painting and and he's been an artist since he was 3 as well. So I think at 3, he remembered it because he drew it out. He's like killing you asked him, what is this? And he said, stabbing the mama, and the sword had blood on it. And I remember I thought it was because he was angry at me because of divorcing his dad. But then whenever I did the regression years later, it answered the question of Blaine and I, our relationship. And I remembered the picture where he drew, because he must have remembered that, or it was like clues. Like, I think in our lifetime, we don't realize we do these things and we're not even conscious. I would never have known to put it back to that picture he drew at 3 had I not had the regression, that's a memory of his. I wouldn't have known that he was stabbed me with a dagger, I wouldn't have known, because he didn't articulate it. He just drew it.
Right. And it makes you wonder how many people are walking around with past traumas or soul memories that they're not aware of, things that affect them on the day to day, anxieties or fears or phobias or I mean,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of issues that maybe they've just carried in they're not aware of. So back to past lives in QHHT. So you were trained as a QHHT therapist. What, 3-4 years ago? Is that, or was it longer
Well,
than
it's
that?
not exactly therapist, but it is a type of therapy that Dolores Cannon came up with doing her years of study and talking to people and her hypnosis. So I'm not exactly a therapist or trained therapist, but it's called quantum healing hypnosis technique.
Okay.
And it's just her way of talking to the subconscious. You go and you get answers. Usually it shows you exactly what you need for that moment for healing.
Okay. And does it
And
just
how
kind of
about
walk?
you?
Does it kind of walk? How about me? In what way?
Didn't you do a regression on the computer? It
I
wasn't
have done
QHT,
some.
but yeah.
I have done some. Minor through Dr. Brian Weiss or Weiss, however. Uh, but yeah, mine were through him, and they were very interesting. They were very revealing. I think sometimes if you go into it with either you can go into it openly just to kind of see what you uncover. It's really quite amazing how much information our minds and memory our minds hold that we're not even aware of. Um, on one occasion, I was able to go back as far as being in utero. So it was, and it's interesting because I had some questions going into this past life regression, kind of like, surrounding my childhood, was I, was I wanted? That was kind of the question, like who was I to the family and was I wanted there? And so what I remember in the regression was that I was in the womb and I was probably pretty close to birth, but I remember hearing our mother laughing with her friends or our aunts because they lived together at that time. And I had the knowledge that it was really cold.
Hmm.
And what was interesting is when I looked
Interesting.
up that date in history, it was unseasonably cold in Texas that winter. It was much colder than it had ever been before. So that was really interesting that I had the knowledge of that. And then it skipped forward to my birth. And so I was in the hospital room, and it was basically right after I had been birthed, and I could see the nurse, and I saw her face, I saw her brown hair, and I kind of saw our mother and her long hair and her fuzzy, it was fuzzy though, but I saw the nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And then it forwarded me to a day when we were at our grandparents' house, and I must have been 4 or 5 years old, and they were having a yard sale that day.
Hmm.
And it was always funny to me because, you and I, when we were children, we used to write on walls and anything we could
Mm-hmm.
find because I don't know why we did that, but we wrote on everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember our grandparents' house, they had a screen door and it was written on the outside, and like it was barely legible because at the time I couldn't spell yet. I was still learning how to write and
Mm-hmm.
spell. And it said, "Keep out, you people." And I always wondered as an adult, why did I write that on their door? And I went back to that day of the garage sale, and I realized that I wrote it because my grandmother was afraid that people were going to walk into the front door while they were all out in the backyard and that she wasn't going to be able to see who was coming in. So I wrote on the door, "Keep out," so that nobody would come in. So I'm like, oh, okay, so that's
Oh.
why I wrote on the front door, "Keep out, you people."
Oh,
And then
wow.
it was interesting because, yeah, the question that I had was, was I wanted? And I went back to that place as a 4 or 5 year old, and I just
Mm-hmm.
felt so warm, so loved, so accepted,
Mm-hmm.
and so wanted. And even the day of my birth, it was like there was no sadness, there was no like anxiety about my arrival. It was all very loving and happy. It was a
Mm-hmm.
happy time. And so it
Hmm.
answered the question that I had, which was, was I a wanted baby? And it was so funny that I ever even had that question in my mind, but, it was there. So I think in that way, regression therapy can help even in your current life, as well as uncovering clues or uncovering traumas about maybe what you've experienced before. I know the University of UVA has a huge program where they study so many subjects. They've got thousands of studies of past lives there, and it's purely a scientific approach. But I would love to get into some of their case studies and read up because it's just absolutely fascinating to me. But, yeah, in my own life, going back to past life, there's, I think we've been significant people, and I think we've been, insignificant people. I think we've experienced probably a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and there was that time where, and I've always felt like like a very feminine soul. And so I asked, have I ever been a man? Because they say you can do both for growth, And
Sure.
yes, of course, I have been a man. And when I saw myself, and I can't even remember how this was done, whether it's meditation, whatever it was like a dream state, though. It seemed very real. And I was looking into my face, and I was this Japanese, like Buddhist, like warrior. I say warrior, but I didn't look like a warrior because but it meant I felt like I was trained in some sort of martial arts. And, but I was a man, and I was Japanese, and I had like one of those long things. I don't know where that comes from. I don't even know if that's Chinese or Japanese, but it seemed like I had something growing out of my head, but my head was bald.
I mean, it could be a lot of things. I mean,
Except
yeah,
for a little
I would have to
tail or
look because I'm not
I'm
certain
not
on that.
sure who does the little hair thing. That's what it
I
felt
don't
like
know.
anyway. I don't know.
So for anybody who
knows?
hasn't done like past life regression, or who hasn't, like, what books or what methods would you recommend for somebody who's interested in exploring past lives?
Well, I definitely would recommend, of course, I'm going to say Dolores Cannon because her work has affected me. I've had some really eye-opening, soul retrieval, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, through her hypnosis technique that I did with others. And then, of course, doing the training and then doing it, working with other people. And so I got to see the different ways we experience life. And it's really interesting because we're not always, it seemed like that in the beginning we were other things. We weren't humans exactly. And some people have conscious memory of being moss, or or being an object or an animal or something
Like a rock,
other than human.
right?
Yeah. And so I think that early on, perhaps we wanted to experience ourselves that way, but we don't necessarily do that anymore. But I just think it's a wonderful tool to use to get answers. So if you have problems with people in your life, say, for instance, I had an issue, like I said, we had a hard relationship, me and my older son, and to find out the basis is that it goes way back. And it really, I think it's just we're healing and we're, correcting karma and doing it in a different way. But I mean, I don't have experience with anyone else's method. So, I think it's important to go to where you're called or you're drawn. Like if you're drawn to, did you say Weiss? If that's someone who draws you in and you're really attracted, then that's your teacher, But for me, my teacher was Dolores Cannon's material, and I've been and read quite a lot of her books. So I would just start with who you feel most drawn to, and get with a trusted person that you trust that can hypnotize you, because it is a process. You are in a vulnerable state. I mean, they can't really mess you up. I don't think people can do things to you like they used to say, do the, in the movies, the 50s, they had this hypnotize you and make you be a zombie.
Right.
I don't think it's necessarily like that, although we do have the comics where they show they hypnotize groups of people and they do silly stuff. I don't think it can really mess you up, but I do think you want somebody who is professional, and they're not going to be asking you to tell them about their life. Or you could do that, but you really do want the healing focused on you. So you want your therapist to, you want somebody who is good at what they're doing.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that concludes our podcast for today. Devina, thank you so much for sharing your stories and your expertise in this subject.
Thanks.